You're in danger. Pretend I'm your lover, Mafia boss whispered. What happened next shocked. The crystal glasses clinked like warning bells as Arlene Janicki balanced a tray through the dim amber glow of the gilded cage. The air hung thick with cigar smoke and whispered deals, the kind of atmosphere that made her skin prickle with unease. She'd been serving drinks here for 3 months, long enough to know which tables to avoid and which conversations to pretend she hadn't heard. Tonight, she'd made a mistake. Her tennis shoes squeaked against the polished floor as she approached booth 7 to clear empty tumblers. The 2 men sitting there had lowered their voices, but not quickly enough. She'd caught fragments: shipment, the docks, Monday midnight, words that painted a picture she desperately wished she hadn't seen. The man with the scar slicing through his eyebrow looked up first. His eyes locked onto hers with the precision of a sniper finding his target. Arlene's breath caught. Her fingers trembled, making the glasses on her tray rattle like teeth chattering in fear. She forced a smile, the kind servers give when they're pretending everything is fine, and turned on her heel. Don't run. Don't look back. Just walk. But her body betrayed her. Her steps came too fast, too uneven. Behind her, she heard the scrape of leather against vinyl as someone stood. The murmur of conversation around booth 7 had stopped completely. Arlene's vision tunneled. The exit seemed miles away instead of 20 feet. Her heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack through. She clutched the tray tighter, her only anchor to normalcy as the world tilted sideways. Before you continue, please let me know where in the world you're listening from today. Now, back to the story. 3 more steps to the bar. 2. 1. A hand clamped down on her shoulder, firm and unyielding. Arlene gasped as she was spun around, the tray clattering from her hands. Glasses shattered across the floor in an explosion of sound that made every head in the lounge turn their way. She found herself pressed against a wall of muscle wrapped in an impeccably tailored black suit. The man towered over her, his presence commanding every inch of space around them. Dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on currency or carved into marble. Severe, handsome, dangerous. But it was the tattoos creeping up from his collar that made her breath stall completely. Aggressive ink crawled up his neck like vines claiming territory, the kind of markings that announced exactly what world this man came from. His hand slid from her shoulder to her waist, possessive and deliberate. He pulled her close, so close she could smell expensive cologne mixed with something darker, gunpowder, maybe, or the metallic tang of violence held barely in check. Arlene tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. His other hand came up to cup her jaw, tilting her face toward his. His beard grazed her cheek as he leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear. "You're in danger," he growled, his voice like gravel and silk twisted together. "Pretend I'm your lover." The words sent ice flooding through her veins even as his breath warmed her skin. Before she could process, before she could scream or fight or think, his lips pressed against her temple in a kiss that looked tender from the outside but felt like a brand. Arlene's eyes went wide. Over the man's broad shoulder, she could see booth 7. The scarred man had half risen from his seat, his hand inside his jacket where she knew, somehow she knew, a gun waited. But he'd frozen, uncertainty flickering across his brutal features. The man holding her shifted slightly, angling his body to shield hers while maintaining the illusion of an intimate embrace. His hand at her waist tightened in silent warning. Play along. Around them, the tension in the gilded cage shifted like a living thing. Conversations resumed in hushed tones. Eyes that had been watching now politely looked away. Even the scarred man slowly settled back into his booth, though his gaze never left them. "Smile," the man whispered against her hair, still holding her in that false embrace. "Act like you're exactly where you want to be." Arlene's mind raced. This man, this stranger with murder in his eyes and ink on his skin, had just saved her life. Or claimed her as his own. She couldn't tell which, and somehow, she suspected both were true. Her hands, trapped between their bodies, pressed against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and controlled, a complete contrast to her own frantic pulse. His suit was custom-tailored, the fabric worth more than her entire month's rent. Everything about him screamed power, control, danger. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. His dark eyes met hers, and for a moment, she saw something flicker in their depths. Calculation, recognition, and something that looked almost like regret. "Someone who just made you untouchable," he said quietly. Then louder, for the benefit of anyone listening. "Come on, amore. Let's get you home." He kept his arm around her waist as he guided her toward the exit, his body angled protectively between her and booth 7. Arlene's legs moved on autopilot, her mind still trying to catch up to what had just happened. The cold night air hit her face as they stepped outside, a shocking contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of the gilded cage. An armored black vehicle idled at the curb, as if it had been waiting for exactly this moment. The man opened the door, his hand still firm on her waist. In the streetlight, she could finally see him clearly, the sharp angles of his face, the gray threading through his dark hair at his temples, the weight of authority that hung on him like a second skin. "Get in, Arlene," he said, and her blood turned to ice. He knew her name. Arlene's legs threatened to give out as she climbed into the vehicle, her hands gripping the leather seat for support. The door closed with a heavy thunk that sounded like a vault ceiling. The man slid in beside her, filling the confined space with his presence, and the car pulled smoothly into traffic before she could even think about reaching for the door handle. "How do you know my name?" Her voice came out stronger than she expected, anger cutting through the fear. He settled back against the seat, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her want to shrink away. "I know everything about everyone who works in my establishments." Arlene's breath caught. "The gilded cage is yours?" "Among other things." He adjusted his cufflinks with practiced precision. "I'm Leopoldo de Rose." The name hit her like a physical blow. Everyone in the city knew that name, whispered it with a mixture of fear and respect. The de Rose family controlled half the docks, a quarter of the construction contracts, and according to rumor, several judges and city councilmen. "I didn't hear anything," Arlene said quickly, desperately. "I don't know what those men were talking about. I wasn't even paying attention." "Stop." His voice cut through her rambling like a blade. "The man with the scar is Cale Mercer. He works for Silas Vane, and Silas doesn't leave loose ends." He turned to face her fully, and she saw something almost like sympathy flicker across his features. "The moment you looked at that table, you became a problem he needs to solve." Arlene's hands twisted in her lap. "So what happens now? You just drop me off at home and hope they don't find me?" "No." Leopoldo's jaw tightened. "You're coming with me. Until I can neutralize this threat, you're under my protection." "Protection?" Arlene laughed, the sound brittle and sharp. "Or am I just changing one cage for another?" His expression didn't change, but something dark flickered in his eyes. "Perhaps. But at least in my cage, you'll stay alive." The estate rose from the hillside like something out of a Gothic novel, all stone walls and iron gates that looked designed to keep armies out. Or prisoners in. Arlene pressed her face closer to the window as they wound up the long driveway, her stomach twisting tighter with each passing second. The car stopped beneath a covered portico. Leopoldo emerged first, buttoning his suit jacket with the ease of a man who'd never questioned his place in the world. He offered his hand to help her out, and Arlene hesitated before taking it, her fingers small and cold against his palm. Inside, the foyer stretched upward 3 stories, chandeliers dripping crystal light across marble floors that reflected her terrified face back at her. This place could swallow her studio apartment 20 times over and still have room to spare. "Rosa will show you to your room," Leopoldo said, gesturing to a middle-aged woman in a crisp black dress who'd appeared as if summoned by thought alone. "You'll find everything you need." "What if I want to leave?" Arlene's voice echoed too loud in the cavernous space. His expression hardened. "Then you'll die before you reach the main road. Vane's men are already watching the perimeter, waiting for exactly that." He stepped closer, and she forced herself not to retreat. There are rules here, Arlene. You don't go outside without an escort. You don't use your phone. You don't contact anyone from your old life. Break them, and I can't protect you. The woman, Rosa, touched her elbow gently. Come, miss. Let me show you. Arlene followed her up a sweeping staircase, each step taking her further from the world she knew. The bedroom Rosa led her to was larger than her entire apartment, decorated in cream and gold that probably cost more than she'd earned in her entire life. A wardrobe stood open, revealing dresses and clothes in her size. Someone had planned this. Someone had known she'd be here. The door closed softly behind Rosa, and Arlene heard the unmistakable click of a lock engaging. Prison, then. Just a prettier one. 3 days of gilded captivity had passed before Leopoldo appeared at her door, holding a garment bag like an offering. We're going out tonight. Arlene looked up from the book she'd been pretending to read. I thought I couldn't leave. You can't leave alone. He laid the bag across her bed, the black fabric spilling out like an oil slick. But we need to be seen together. The story is that you're my mistress, that I've been keeping you for months. We need to sell it. The dress was backless, elegant, and entirely impractical, designed to showcase rather than conceal. When Arlene emerged from the bathroom, she found Leopoldo waiting in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car. His eyes traveled over her slowly, something unreadable flickering across his features. Perfect, he said quietly. You look like you belong to me. The restaurant was the kind of place where silence felt expensive and every table held someone important. Leopoldo kept his hand at the small of her bare back as they walked through, his touch possessive and warm against her skin. Arlene felt every eye in the room track their movement. Second table from the left, he murmured as they reached their booth. Don't look directly, but Vane's man is watching. Act natural. Natural. As if anything about this was natural. Leopoldo slid into the booth beside her instead of across, his thigh pressing against hers. He draped his arm across the back of the seat, his fingers playing idly with a strand of her hair. To anyone watching, they looked like lovers stealing moments between courses. Lean closer, he instructed softly. Laugh like I said something charming. Arlene forced a laugh, turning toward him. This close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his beard. He was older, maybe 20 years her senior, but there was something magnetic about him, a gravitational pull she hadn't expected. His hand moved from her hair to cup her jaw, tilting her face up. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her for real this time, not just for show. Her breath caught. You're doing well, he whispered, but his thumb traced her lower lip in a gesture that felt anything but professional. Just a little longer. The waiter arrived with wine, breaking the spell. But when Leopoldo's hand returned to rest on her knee beneath the table, Arlene didn't pull away. His palm was warm through the thin fabric of her dress, and she hated how her body responded, how her pulse quickened not from fear this time, but from something far more dangerous. Across the restaurant, Vane's spy watched them with cold calculation, taking notes on a phone, recording every touch, every glance, every moment of their manufactured intimacy. And somewhere between the second course and dessert, Arlene realized she'd stopped acting. The library smelled of leather and old wood, a sanctuary tucked into the east wing that Rosa had mentioned in passing. Leopoldo had been locked in his study for hours with men whose voices carried the weight of violence even through closed doors. Arlene had grown tired of pacing her gilded prison and decided to explore. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined 3 walls, filled with books that actually looked read rather than decorative. She ran her fingers along the spines, first editions, leather-bound classics, volumes in Italian she couldn't decipher. A man who read. Somehow that made him more dangerous, not less. The desk sat beneath a window overlooking the gardens, its surface neat except for a single frame turned face down. Arlene glanced toward the closed door, her heart hammering with the thrill of trespass, and reached for it. The photograph was old, the colors slightly faded. A summer day, somewhere by the water. A woman with blonde hair and Arlene's own eyes laughed at the camera, her sundress catching the breeze. Beside her stood a man Arlene almost didn't recognize. Younger, clean-shaven, no ink marking his skin. But those eyes were unmistakable. Leopoldo. And her mother. The frame slipped from Arlene's fingers, clattering against the desk. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps as she stared at the image. Her mother, who died when Arlene was 4. Her mother, who she barely remembered except through other faded photographs. Her mother, standing close enough to Leopoldo de Rose that their shoulders touched. 20 years ago, maybe more. Before the tattoos. Before whatever had transformed that clean-cut young man into the dangerous crime lord who now controlled her fate. You shouldn't be in here. Arlene spun. Leopoldo filled the doorway, his expression unreadable. He crossed the room in 3 strides, his eyes falling to the photograph now lying face-up on his desk. Something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps, or regret. He picked up the frame with careful hands, as if it might shatter. You knew her. Arlene's voice shook. You knew my mother. Leopoldo was silent for a long moment, his thumb tracing the edge of the frame. When he finally looked at her, his eyes held shadows she'd never seen before. I did more than know her, Arlene. He set the photo down gently. I loved her. And I destroyed her life. The admission hung between them like smoke. Arlene's mind raced, connecting threads she didn't want to follow. Her mother's sudden poverty after her father left. The years of struggling, of moving from apartment to apartment. Her mother's death, officially an accident, but Arlene had always wondered. My father, she whispered. What did you do to my father? Leopoldo's jaw tightened. That's a conversation for another time. No. Arlene stepped forward, anger burning through her shock. You brought me here. You put your hands on me. You made me pretend. Her voice cracked. You owe me the truth. The library smelled of leather and old wood, a sanctuary tucked into the east wing that Rosa had mentioned in passing. Leopoldo had been locked in his study for hours with men whose voices carried the weight of violence even through closed doors. Arlene had grown tired of pacing her gilded prison and decided to explore. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined 3 walls, filled with books that actually looked read rather than decorative. She ran her fingers along the spines, first editions, leather-bound classics, volumes in Italian she couldn't decipher. A man who read. Somehow that made him more dangerous, not less. The desk sat beneath a window overlooking the gardens, its surface neat except for a single frame turned face down. Arlene glanced toward the closed door, her heart hammering with the thrill of trespass, and reached for it. The photograph was old, the colors slightly faded. A summer day, somewhere by the water. A woman with blonde hair and Arlene's own eyes laughed at the camera, her sundress catching the breeze. Beside her stood a man Arlene almost didn't recognize. Younger, clean-shaven, no ink marking his skin. But those eyes were unmistakable. Leopoldo. And her mother. The frame slipped from Arlene's fingers, clattering against the desk. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps as she stared at the image. Her mother, who died when Arlene was 4. Her mother, who she barely remembered except through other faded photographs. Her mother, standing close enough to Leopoldo de Rose that their shoulders touched. 20 years ago, maybe more. Before the tattoos. Before whatever had transformed that clean-cut young man into the dangerous crime lord who now controlled her fate. You shouldn't be in here. Arlene spun. Leopoldo filled the doorway, his expression unreadable. He crossed the room in 3 strides, his eyes falling to the photograph now lying face-up on his desk. Something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps, or regret. He picked up the frame with careful hands, as if it might shatter. You knew her. Arlene's voice shook. You knew my mother. Leopoldo was silent for a long moment, his thumb tracing the edge of the frame. When he finally looked at her, his eyes held shadows she'd never seen before. I did more than know her, Arlene. He set the photo down gently. I loved her. And I destroyed her life. The admission hung between them like smoke. Arlene's mind raced, connecting threads she didn't want to follow. Her mother's sudden poverty after her father left. The years of struggling, of moving from apartment to apartment. Her mother's death, officially an accident, but Arlene had always wondered. My father, she whispered. What did you do to my father? Leopoldo's jaw tightened. That's a conversation for another time. No. Arlene stepped forward, anger burning through her shock. You brought me here. You put your hands on me. You made me pretend. Her voice cracked. You owe me the truth. Leopoldo had insisted they attend the opera, another performance for Vane's watchful eyes. Arlene sat through 3 hours of Italian she couldn't understand, her mind still tangled in the revelation from the library. Every time Leopoldo's hand found hers in the darkness, she thought of him holding her mother's hand the same way, 20 years ago. The parking garage was nearly empty when they left, their footsteps echoing off concrete walls. Leopoldo's driver had texted that he was running 5 minutes late, engine trouble. Something that should have been inconsequential. Stay close, Leopoldo murmured, his hand moving to the small of her back. His body had gone tense, predatory. Something's wrong. Arlene heard it then, the scrape of a shoe against concrete, too deliberate to be accidental. Shadows moved between the parked cars, shapes resolving into men as they stepped into the fluorescent light. 4 of them. All armed. Cale Mercer stood at the center, his scarred eyebrow lifting in mock greeting. Mr. DeRose. Enjoying the opera? Puccini, wasn't it? All that tragedy and doomed love. His eyes slid to Arlene. Fitting. Walk away, Cale. Leopoldo's voice was ice. This is between me and Vane. See, that's where you're wrong. Cale raised his gun, the barrel catching the light. The girl heard things. Mr. Vane doesn't like loose ends. Even the ones you've claimed. Everything happened at once. Leopoldo shoved Arlene behind him as the first shot cracked through the garage. She stumbled against a car, her scream dying in her throat as Leopoldo drew his own weapon with practiced speed. 2 shots. Precise, controlled. 2 of Vane's men dropped. But there were still 2 more. Cale fired again. Leopoldo twisted, returning fire, but the third gunman had circled around. Arlene saw him raise his weapon, saw the barrel aimed directly at her chest. Leopoldo threw himself in front of her. The impact of the bullet spun him sideways. He slammed into her, his weight driving them both to the ground behind a concrete pillar. Blood bloomed across his shoulder, staining his white dress shirt crimson. Stay down, he growled through gritted teeth, still managing to keep his gun trained on their attackers. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called the police. Cale swore viciously, gesturing to his remaining man. This isn't over, DeRose. Vane always collects his debts. They disappeared into the shadows as quickly as they'd appeared, leaving behind only spent brass casings and the copper scent of blood. Arlene's hands shook as she pressed them against Leopoldo's shoulder, trying to staunch the bleeding. His blood was hot and slick against her palms. Too much of it. You took a bullet for me, she whispered, her voice breaking. His dark eyes found hers, pain and something fiercer burning in their depths. I told you. You're under my protection. Why? The question tore from her. Why does any of this matter to you? But the police were flooding into the garage now, and the answer would have to wait. Leopoldo refused the hospital, of course. They returned to the estate where Rosa had antiseptic and surgical supplies waiting, as if gunshot wounds were just another Tuesday evening inconvenience. Now Arlene sat beside him in his private study, her hands steady despite everything as she cleaned the wound that had torn through his shoulder. The bullet had gone clean through. Small mercies. You should have let the doctors handle this, she said, threading the needle Rosa had provided. Her hands remembered skills from the 2 semesters of nursing school she'd completed before money ran out. Doctors ask questions. Leopoldo's jaw tightened as she began stitching. Questions lead to reports. Reports lead to problems I don't need. Arlene pulled the suture through, watching him absorb the pain without flinching. You're going to tell me about my father. Now. While you can't walk away. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Clever girl. Stop stalling. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on something distant. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old sins. Your father, Marcus Janicki, was my partner. We ran operations together for 5 years. He was brilliant with numbers, could make money appear and disappear like magic. Leopoldo's hand clenched against his thigh. I trusted him completely. I introduced him to your mother at a charity gala I hosted. Arlene's hands stilled on the needle. And he stole from the organization. $2 million over 6 months, skimmed so carefully I didn't notice until the bosses above me did. His eyes met hers, dark with regret. The penalty for that kind of theft is death. Not just his, yours, your mother's, everyone connected to him. The needle slipped, pricking her finger. Blood welled up, mixing with his on her hands. So you killed him? No. Leopoldo caught her wrist gently. I gave him a choice. Disappear forever, or watch his family die before they killed him anyway. I staged his death, a car accident, burned beyond recognition. I used favors I'd spent years accumulating to make it convincing. My mother thought he abandoned us. Arlene's voice broke. She died thinking he didn't love her enough to stay. I know. The words came out raw. I watched from a distance. Sent money when I could, through channels she'd never trace. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough. He reached up with his good arm, his fingers brushing away a tear on her cheek she hadn't realized had fallen. When I saw you at the Gilded Cage, working in my lounge, I knew fate was giving me a chance at redemption I didn't deserve. Arlene jerked away from his touch, standing so abruptly the medical supplies scattered. Redemption? You think saving me now erases what you did? My mother worked 3 jobs. We lived in places with rats and broken heating. She cried herself to sleep for years. Her hands shook with rage. You didn't give my father a choice. You gave him an execution and called it mercy. Arlene. No. She backed toward the door. You're just like Vane. Just another man who plays with people's lives and calls it business. She fled before he could respond, his blood still staining her hands. Arlene waited until 3 in the morning, when even the guards' vigilance flagged with exhaustion. She'd watched their patterns for the past 2 nights from her bedroom window, memorizing the gaps in their patrol routes. The window in the east bathroom had a faulty latch. Rosa had mentioned it needed repair but hadn't gotten around to it yet. Small mercies. The drop to the ground was only 8 feet. Arlene landed in a crouch, her ankle twisting slightly but holding. She stayed low, moving through the shadows of the garden until she reached the perimeter wall. An oak tree grew close enough to the stone that she could climb it, branch by branch, until she could drop down on the other side. Freedom tasted like cold night air and fear. She walked for 2 hours before finding a main road where she could catch a bus. The driver gave her disheveled appearance a long look but accepted her crumpled bills without comment. Dawn was breaking by the time she reached a neighborhood, painting the familiar streets in shades of gray and gold. Home. Safety. Her own space where no one could control her or lie to her or make her feel things she didn't want to feel. The door to her apartment hung open. Arlene's heart stopped. She took the stairs slowly, every instinct screaming at her to run. But where would she go? This was all she had left. The apartment had been destroyed. Furniture overturned, cushions slashed, her belongings scattered across the floor like debris after a tornado. Someone had been looking for something, or sending a message. Cale Mercer sat in her kitchen chair, his scarred eyebrow lifting as she appeared in the doorway. There she is. We've been waiting. Another man stood by the window, blocking the fire escape. Both were armed. How did you? Arlene's voice died as understanding crashed over her. They'd been watching, waiting for her to run. Leopoldo's protection had been the only thing keeping them at bay, and she'd thrown it away. "Mr. Vane wants to have a conversation with you," Cale said pleasantly, standing. "About what you heard. About what you know. About how best to use you to draw out your lover." He smiled, and it was worse than any threat. "DeRose took a bullet for you. Imagine what he'll do when we have you screaming." Arlene backed toward the door, but the second man was already there, his hand clamping around her arm like a vice. "Don't worry," Cale continued, pulling out zip ties. "We'll take good care of you. Until we don't need you anymore." The zip ties bit into her wrists. As they dragged her down the stairs and toward a waiting van, Arlene thought of Leopoldo's words in the restaurant. "In my cage, at least you'll stay alive." She'd chosen the wrong cage. The warehouse smelled of rust and river water, a forgotten space on the docks where screams would go unheard. Arlene's wrists burned where the zip ties had cut into her skin during the drive. Cale shoved her into a metal chair, securing her ankles to its legs with more plastic restraints. "Mr. Vane will be with you shortly," he said, almost politely, before disappearing into the shadows. Arlene tested the restraints, but they held firm. Her mind raced through options: scream, fight, negotiate, but each scenario ended the same way. Alone. Helpless. Stupid for running. Footsteps echoed across concrete. A man emerged from the darkness, younger than Leopoldo but with none of his controlled power. Silas Vane wore his cruelty like cologne, obvious, overwhelming, desperate to be noticed. His suit was expensive but ill-fitting, new money trying too hard to look established. Arlene Janicki. He circled her slowly, a predator examining prey. The waitress who caught DeRose's eye. "I have to admit, I didn't see that coming. Leopoldo usually has better taste. What do you want?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Vane laughed, the sound sharp and ugly. "Want? I want what's mine. The docks, the contracts, the respect that old dinosaur has hoarded for decades." He leaned close, his breath hot against her face. "And you, sweetheart, are going to help me get it." "I don't know anything about his business. I don't need you to know anything." Vane straightened, pulling out his phone. "I just need you to bleed." He snapped a photo of her, bruised, bound, terrified. His fingers moved across the screen, typing something. "I'm sending this to DeRose now, along with an address and a time." Vane smiled. "He'll come for you. That's what men like him do. They play the hero, especially for women they think they can save. It's pathetic, really." Arlene's throat tightened. "He won't come. I left. I told him I didn't trust him." "Oh, honey." Vane patted her cheek condescendingly. "That's what makes it perfect. He'll come because you ran. Guilt is a powerful motivator." He pocketed his phone. Men like Leopoldo, they build these codes of honor around themselves. Rules about protecting women, about loyalty, about doing the right thing. It makes them predictable. Weak. "And what does that make you?" Arlene met his eyes. "Someone who hides behind women because he can't face his enemies directly?" The slap came fast, snapping her head sideways. Pain exploded across her cheek, bringing tears to her eyes. "Careful," Vane warned. "You're only valuable while you're breathing. Don't make me reconsider that." He turned toward the door. "Cale, make sure she stays comfortable. We want her looking properly distressed for DeRosa's arrival." As his footsteps faded, Arlene tasted blood in her mouth. Through the warehouse windows, she could see dawn breaking over the city. Somewhere out there, Leopoldo was receiving that photo, making whatever choice would seal both their fates. She'd run from one monster straight into the arms of another. But this time, there was no one left to whisper "pretend I'm your lover" and pull her to safety. This time, she'd have to save herself. The knife was still there. Arlene had forgotten about it until her fingers brushed against the small blade tucked into the lining of her jacket, the one Leopoldo had given her that first night at the estate. "Always keep it on you," he'd said, his dark eyes serious. "Even if you think you're safe. Especially then." She'd thought it was just another way to control her. Now she understood it was a promise. Cale had searched her pockets but missed the hidden seam. Sloppy. Arrogant. Fatal mistakes. Arlene worked the blade free slowly, her bound hands making every movement agonizing. The zip ties were thick, but the knife was sharp. She sawed carefully, the plastic biting deeper into her wrists before finally, snapping free. The warehouse exploded with gunfire before she could cut her ankles loose. Glass shattered as men in dark tactical gear stormed through the windows. Leopoldo's voice rang out, commanding and lethal. "Drop your weapons. Now." Vane's men opened fire. The warehouse became a war zone. Muzzle flashes in the darkness, bullets sparking off metal, men shouting and dying. Arlene threw herself sideways, the chair toppling with her still attached to it. She worked frantically at the ankle restraints as chaos erupted around her. Through the smoke and shadows, she saw Leopoldo. His shoulder was still bandaged, but he moved like violence incarnate, taking down Vane's men with brutal efficiency. Their eyes met across the warehouse, and something passed between them: apology, forgiveness, recognition. Then Cale appeared behind him, gun raised. "No!" Arlene screamed, but her voice was lost in the gunfire. Leopoldo spun, but not fast enough. The shot rang out. And missed, because Vane had grabbed Cale's arm, shoving him aside. "He's mine," Vane snarled, leveling his own weapon at Leopoldo's chest. "This ends with me." The ankle restraints finally snapped. Arlene surged to her feet, the small knife clutched in her bleeding hand. Vane's back was to her, his finger tightening on the trigger. No time to think. No time for fear. She lunged. The blade sank into Vane's side, just below his ribs. Not deep enough to kill, but enough to make him scream and twist away from Leopoldo. His gun clattered across the concrete. Vane turned on her, his face contorted with rage and pain. "You stupid bitch." Leopoldo's shot cut off the rest. The bullet caught Vane's center mass, the impact driving him backward. He hit the ground hard, blood spreading beneath him in a dark pool. The warehouse fell silent except for ragged breathing and distant sirens. Leopoldo crossed to Arlene in 3 strides, his hands framing her face. "You ran," he said, and there was so much in those 2 words: hurt, understanding, relief. "I came back," she whispered. His thumb traced her split lip, her bruised cheek. "You saved me." "No." Arlene pressed her forehead against his. "We saved each other." Around them, Leopoldo's men secured the warehouse. Vane's body lay still, his empire crumbling with his final breath. Cale had vanished in the chaos, a problem for another day. But right now, in this moment, Arlene let herself lean into Leopoldo's embrace. His arms came around her, solid and sure, and for the first time since that night in the gilded cage, she felt something other than fear. She felt like she'd finally stopped running.